repeats each summer, that we reach a part of the Dáil term where a motion on post offices is before the House, a motion to support them and to keep them open. It's been a regular feature of the Dáil since I've come here. Support for urban and rural post offices is shared across all parties and seems to unite all colours of political opinion. It's in every programme for government that they will support the rural and urban post offices. It's odd then that despite universal support, we're confronted yet again by a crisis in the network, that despite Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael support, post offices continue to close or to be threatened with closure, despite us all knowing and eulogising the role that they play in keeping local communities bound together, and that it seems we can't save them. This is very, very odd. Everyone supports them, everyone acknowledges the role they play and how vital they are to our communities, that they're a centre and a focus of our communities, and yet they continue to decline. In 2016, when I first entered the Dáil, there were 1,100 post offices across the country. According to a recent Dáil committee, there are now 944. In a previous Dáil motion, and there have been many, all passed as far as I can remember, there were campaigns in County Sligo, County Kerry, West Limerick, parts of Dublin like Rialto to keep post offices open. And those local campaigners have been fighting over the years to keep them, with many large campaigns, because people understand the practical and social importance of the post office. Only last week, the post office in one of the oldest villages in Dublin closed down. Chapelizod Post Office services a community that has a large ageing population, but also, hopefully within the next year, will have a new community in social housing that is to be built nearby. This makes no sense at all. Certainly the postmistress was retiring, but looking for an alternative didn't seem to be biting the bums of the on post management at all. What they're now saying is that those who live in Chapelizod village who need to access services must walk 1 kilometre to Ballyfermot. There's no connecting bus service, and the two areas are joined by a very steep and large hill. That's not fair to older people, to people with disabilities, to young mothers with babies and prams. But I'll repeat what I said at a previous Dáil motion. I contrast the efforts of campaigners and communities with the inaction and the lethargy of the government, the ministers who are in charge, and indeed An Post themselves. This closure programme is not inevitable, nor is it a natural phenomena. It's the end result of a slavish devotion to neoliberal economics. The closures of 159 post offices in recent years is because, as far as the management of An Post is concerned, they were not commercially viable. As far as the government is concerned, they are not commercially viable. And as far as the minister is concerned, they are not commercially viable. The threatened closure here of perhaps another 200 post offices stems from the same logic and the same reasoning. I support the immediate payment of a PSO levy to keep the offices open and replace them with the now transformation payment, the now ended transformation payment. But that will not address the decline itself. When we discussed the previous rationalisation programme, we saw 150 post offices closed. The head of retail in An Post stated that up to 700 post offices were not commercially viable. So we have an ongoing threat to the Post, to An Post, the contract for social welfare payments, and the continued threat that these may or may not be tendered out in the future. And I do not accept that EU procurement rules make this inevitable. I believe that such rules are selectively used again and again, largely for ideological reasons, and that threat should end. It's true that there have been and will continue to be changes in technology, commercial businesses moving away from smaller towns, social welfare clients switching to electronic money transition. It's true that actual mail volumes of traditional post have been and continue to decline. But while some elements are outside our control, it does not follow that the end result is the mass closure of the post office network. Not every service or piece of infrastructure needs to be commercially viable to exist or to survive. We don't demand that our primary or our secondary schools are commercially viable, or that health services are commercially viable, and we choose what services and elements of our social and economic life we want to retain and nurture, regardless of commercial viability. If we believe it's important enough, and those of us across the House here do believe it's important enough, then we should save it. So we support this motion, as we did all previous motions, and we'll continue to support demand for a PSO levy by the state to keep these offices open. But I'd support a longer and wider aim of keeping and extending the network and see them as hubs for local life in both rural and urban areas, not simply judged on their commercial viability. It's worth noting some of the statements from the Post Office Union and revisiting some of the reports, and many of them have been produced over the years. But the Irish Postmasters Union carried out a report with the consultants Grant Thornton, and they recommend that the state should introduce a 17 million payment in annual public service obligation. The report says that PSO funding models for on-post networks have already been introduced in the UK, in France, in Spain, in Belgium, in Italy, in Finland and Poland, and all with the approval of the European Commission. Why does the government not follow this model? And I think the Minister should address that. The report also states that the post office network remains a highly valuable national asset and contributes far more to the economy than the cost of the PSO. To calculate the social value of the post office network, there's an annual social value of the post office network is about 334 to 776 million. 28% of the population, not insignificant, 1.3 million people, continue to use the post office every week, including the distribution of 4.6 billion of social welfare payments. So it makes absolutely no sense to us or to anyone across this House that this closure, this rundown of an essential public service, which is what it after all is continuing to decline. On-post financial supports are unsustainable in anything but the short term. Establishing alternative funding options to maintain a sustainable future for the post office networks and for the postmasters is now essential. So we support both the motion and the amendment from